biggest challenge is clients really looking at the short term. We're still in a very short-termist view. And actually, for many of them, they're not thinking about that full funnel. It's all bottom of funnel still. Even some of the bigger brands we work with, they're still running dynamic product ads and really heavily targeted bottom of funnel activity. And they're not really thinking about filling the top of the funnel at all. So therefore, even outside of attribution, their market is shrinking because CPCs are increasing or CTRs decreasing, which is pushing up CPCs. So therefore, how are they shrinking their pot? But attribution may actually help them with the right data and analyze, well, actually, with some of these elements to test, I could start to increase my market purely by opening up visibility through the funnel.
When basically you can't track what happens across multiple sessions, your customer journey gets shrunk. So basically, last click is first click. There's no customer journey, it just is one click. What did they buy or not buy? It's only when you can actually start to improve the tracking, improve the identification of the same customers across different buying sessions, you actually start to understand the multi-channel journey, the fact that they did find you on Facebook, but then they clicked on Google search and then they got signed up for email, etc. So welcome to the podcast, James. Thanks for coming on. I know we've been working with Digital Blueprints for a few years, but I thought, you obviously have some great things to know about the space. You've been in the space a long time. So tell us, first of all, a little bit about Digital Blueprints and maybe how you got into that world.
Yeah, so effectively, Digital Blueprint is a retail consultancy at heart. That's what we do. We do it in a slightly different way because what we do is we implant fractional or part-time directors into brands and then surround them by flexible marketing resource, whether that's through partners or through our own team or through our wide bank of associates that we have as part of the network. And that reaches out to also technology partners. So in terms of how do we find the right fit for that client to solve key issues or even just come to them with a stack that makes sense for their brand. I've been doing retail for 30-ish years, I think. I don't actually want to count it. And hence complete lack of hair. And it's, I've sold everything from drills to dresses, whether that was working at B&Q for a couple of years, leading the digital team there. New Look, for example, spent 4 years at Jules Clothing as multi-channel director. And I've also been kind of a managing director of various different retailers over the last kind of 10 years. So I like selling stuff.
No, I think it's great to have that broad mix because a lot of brands, for like you have basically the same challenges. So the product may be very different. The ways that you might actually get your message out there and generate demand and so on are pretty similar. I know I get asked a lot with Littledata, like, there particular verticals it works well for, and the answer is not really. I mean, as long as you're trading on Shopify and you're investing in online customer acquisition, doesn't really matter which niche you're in.
No, data is one of those fundamentals, isn't it, for any business, regardless whether it's retail, B2B. It doesn't. You've got to get your data right.
Yeah. So, leading on, I guess, the next question, like, where do you see? Tell us a bit about when you first kind of came across Littledata and the sort of maybe where you've seen it be very helpful with some of the brands you work with.
How long ago was it? Probably about 2.5, 3 years ago. Came across Littledata purely because I was running a UK flooring business. And ultimately we'd just acquired the leading player in that market. And we had to kind of bring our tech stack together and actually trying to align that data set in terms of, okay, we're using a hand-built e-commerce function over here. We're using a NetSuite random concoction over here. As we started to bring them both onto the Shopify platform, it was a case of Shopify Plus. How do we standardize that data set? So therefore we actually know we're getting the consistent delivery of the same metrics in the same way. And also trying to, because our media spend was significant, we could be spending anything up to £750,000 a month on paid media. How do we ensure that we've got as much information and data as we possibly can coming into the platforms to allow us to really, in my eyes, stop spending that much?
Yeah, I think that whole saving costs on paid acquisition is a big theme, right? The last couple of years, brands need to get to profitability. It's stopped it being about growth at all costs and more about growth at reasonable costs or growth at, profitable growth, as we've been saying that mantra. And I actually find it incredible when we look back to those sort of crazy years, sort of COVID boom, where people just don't seem to be concerned about cost and profit at all.
It's weird because it went kind of full circle.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, it was the right rationalization, making sure your channel mix was right. We were back, the attribution conversation. We've been talking about attribution for 10 years, but people were just about starting to get into the habit of going, oh, what's that? And how do we use it to drive profitable growth? And then COVID hit and everything went to the wall. It was about share gain. It was about survival. It was about pulling on, in some cases, a desperate need state for customers to have things in their home that, they would usually go out and purchase. So it's just about being front of mind and just grabbing business.
So, but let's go and talk about attribution, because, obviously it is, as you say, it's not a new thing. People have needed to do online marketing attribution for decades. But what are your views of a sort of, the kind of brands you work with, the kind of Shopify brands you work with, the usefulness of them sort of, I guess I see sort of three kind of approaches for brands. You have the kind of get the data right in Google Analytics. You have the sort of buy a proprietary attribution modeling tool, a kind of Triple Whale, Northbeam, something like that. Or you have the sort of, build your own, quite for bigger brands, maybe to try and build your own model. What do you think is appropriate for maybe it's a different change of different size of brand?
Well, for some businesses, they haven't even got a clue what attribution is.
Yeah.
It's just a word they hear, and for them, it's measurement.
Yeah.
And for others, it's about, okay, I understand attribution is a thing, but I don't get what all the models are. How do I choose the right one?
Yeah.
Is it a data-driven model? Doesn't Google do that for me?
Yes,
that kind of conversation? And so for quite a lot of our customers, and even some of the bigger ones, they aren't ready for attribution because their data's not in a place where they could categorically sit down and say, this is the channel that instigated a conversation with a potential prospect or customer. These are the media that were part of that conversation in the middle, and these are the closers. So therefore, how do I use attribution to either increase my market share or close deals quicker?
Yeah.
And so, for many clients, they're not really in that space where they're ready yet.
Yeah.
And for some, they're of a size where ultimately attribution, you've got a lot of other things to switch on first to cover the basics.
I think you made a really important point there, which is that a lot of brands start to try and think about how are we splitting up the pie of all the revenue we've got and attributing it to channels before they've even got the accurate whole pie being tracked. So until you actually say you've got the measurements and the actual headline KPIs, the revenue and stuff is correct. Splitting up is kind of like, why am I worrying about that?
Being great with crap analogies, you could be eating a pie you don't like the taste of. First, you could be going after a completely wrong market by saying, actually, this is driving. You're not even into an apple pie. You're into some cucumber and random concoction.
Okay, let's pause the pie analogy.
Let's go away from pie analogy.
But yes, it's important. Like as you say, brands ultimately need to just have some headline measurements to know how they're doing. And then the secondary question is what's the drove that growth. But it does get. I always say to brands like, attribution is a subjective thing. Like there's no absolute answer to, this channel is working for you. Generally, as we know, it's all in conjunction. People have many, many, many touch points before they buy. Obviously, the stuff that happens offline and sort of the very top of the funnel is fundamentally harder to measure. So it always gets underappreciated. Equally, stuff that happens at the bottom of the funnel, like email clicks and stuff, gets over attributed.
Massively. Yeah. And meta maths is still a thing, which, I think for me at the moment, the biggest challenge is clients really looking at the short term. We're still in a very short termist view. And actually for many of them, they're not thinking about that full funnel. It's all bottom of funnel still. Even some of the bigger brands we work with, they're still running, dynamic product ads and really heavily targeted bottom of funnels activity. And they're not really thinking about filling the top of the funnel at all. So therefore, even outside of attribution, their market is shrinking because CPCs are increasing or CTRs decreasing, which is pushing up CPCs. So therefore, how are they shrinking their pot? But attribution may actually help them with the right data, analyze, well, actually, with some of these elements to test, I could start to increase my market purely by opening up visibility through the funnel.
And one of the other key things about attribution measurement is that for when basically you can't track what happens across multiple sessions, your customer journey gets shrunk. So basically, last click is first click. There's no customer journey. It just is one click.
Yeah.
What did they buy or not buy? It's only when you can actually start to improve the tracking, improve the identification of the same customers across different buying sessions, do you actually start to understand the multi-channel journey, the fact that they did find you on Facebook, but then they've clicked on Google search and then they got sign up for email, etc.
But you've also, lots of brands don't also materially sit back and think before they talk attribution and data, actually, how do our customers shop? Because there's no point in looking at a 7 or 30-day attribution window for someone buying a kitchen or a bathroom.
Yeah.
You're going to sway towards certain media and channels, whereas actually it takes 90 days for someone to go, oh, I need a bathroom.
Yeah.
Oh, sugar.
100%. I mean, I started, when we first started Littledata, our first big client was Made.com doing furniture, and Made always used to say, look, we know from research that customers typically take about 14 touch points before they buy a large ticket item like a sofa. It's a consideration process with them and their wife. They're basically going to be on our site, as you say, for many months before they actually click buy. So kind of looking at 7-day attribution window is just silly.
And, if you're a Made.com or a brand that has physical retail, how do you start to bring that data into the mix, which is a whole different ballgame?
Yep.
Because that's a massive.
And I think that's still a challenge we aspire to. I mean, I think, and we do already solve that Shopify point of sale. I get that it's not as popular a solution in Europe actually as in the US, but I think for brands that are choosing to use Shopify POS as their, which is an increasingly viable solution, they've invested a lot in that last few years. The cool thing is you can tie, based off the customer's email when they go into store and they purchase, you can tie that back to the online journey. So you can start to attribute offline's purchases to online advertising. And if you're doing those multi-channel sales, then that is the holy grail, because we all know that happens. We all know that. In fact, I did another podcast a couple of months ago, and the guest Sam was saying how that had happened to him. He'd seen the online ad, he thought about the brand, but he'd browsed the website a bit, but didn't. And then he was just walking down Oxford Street and walks into the store, and that's online to offline.
Absolutely, and if you're tracking email signups in retail. Then in theory, with event attribution, you can go back and say, well, actually, I did some localized advertising. I increased my density of advertising around this location. On Google, Meta, whatever you want to do, even outdoor, digital outdoor. And did I see a material increase in events in store for signups on Shopify POS? Oh, I did. Okay, right. What does that mean in terms of cost per lead?
And actually,
from a cost per acquisition to a cost per lead.
Exactly. And actually, the using Google Analytics user ID feature, you can actually then visualize that customer journey and actually see, okay, they tend to interact with these kind of things online before they then go and buy offline. So let's talk a bit about UK Flooring Direct, because the one client you just talked about, and I actually made my first purchase from them last week. I'm building a home office, and I bought some laminate flooring from them. Fine product. I have to say, we hadn't used them previously because my wife has traditionally gone for the higher budget
Deans of the world.
But when we wanted to just save a bit of cost, they do some great deals. And one of the things I've noticed actually through this whole home build project, how many of those actually building product type companies are now on Shopify. I mean, I get a lot of Shop Pay, just quick checkout, accelerated checkout now.
Yeah. I think it's partly because two things. One is for those brands that are offering a B2B solution.
Yeah.
It actually offers a really, if you're on Plus, obviously, or if you're using a Shopify plugin for wholesale, it allows that transition across trade and retail, which for the building sector is essential. Even though Screwfix, for example, when I was working for Kingfisher Group, 60% of their customers at the time were DIYers, not tradesmen. Yeah. So it's it is making sure you can cross both. And I will stop hitting this microphone. The other one is, I think it's a B2B, I think is not an emerging piece for e-commerce, but I think many B2B brands are starting to wake up to the fact that they need to be offering the same online experience that customers are shopping with John Lewis, whatever, because they're still shoppers.
Absolutely.
They still need to find stuff quickly, see the pricing, being able to add it to a basket, know that they can click and collect it or pick it up. And for that market, it's even more immediate. I need it in the next hour. I need it in the next couple of hours. Yeah. With all due respect to our tradesmen of the world, the tradespeople, their need is generally in hours, not days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's really interesting how that generational thing of people who've been used to a very slick consumer purchasing experience.
Yep.
You say those same people as a business purchase now, as you say, running their own plumbing business, whatever, and they need the parts. They want the same experience, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe they still want to be able to have their account and their trade discount and so on.
Yeah.
But they still want to be able to click and order and not have to call someone up
And loyalty is still a thing within that market, but that's more for considered purchases where they're buying large volumes.
Yeah.
For it's not the one-man band, but the smaller tradespeople, they just need the product. And actually, because they're generally passing the cost on to the customer, they just need to know they're going to make a margin.
Yeah. Well, I see that. I mean, I've bought most of the products myself to save that last point. But yes, it's been super great that I can just use ShopPay throughout. But anyway, going back to UK Flooring Director, what did you sort of see? You said obviously like the challenge was getting the data in a good place. What did you see specifically the challenges were, and how did Littledata sort of help with that? So
I think the three things which Littledata solved in that particular moment, and it still continues in terms of the reason why I was managing director of UK Flooring Direct, or Keswick Flooring at the time. And for us, it was around ease, really straightforward. We didn't have to involve the IT team particularly. It was a straightforward integration. The second one was just the time it took, which ease and efficiency for me are two very separate things. It can be very easy, but take months to implement, allegedly. But, the ease of being able to connect up all the platforms was really, really straightforward. The third piece was the immediacy of which we saw the data change. So it wasn't, we've got to wait a month for this to happen or for it to back match or all that kind of stuff. It was pretty much immediate. And because we were using we'd done the classic stack. We were looking at a Bloomreach integration for that, rather than Klaviyo or Attentive at the time. And so therefore we weren't able to do the delivery into that email platform, for example, direct integration, but we still used Google Tag Manager to pick up some of those variables and start to push those into Bloomreach. So we saw some of the benefit that I know quite a lot of your clients and some of our clients see from deploying that into CRM platforms.
Well, to be fair, Bloomreach is on the consideration list for next bit years. But no, I'm super pleased to hear that, because I think that's absolutely core to why we started the business, is that we'd been doing this manually as via Google Tag Manager for a number of years, and we'd just seen this constant problem where the kind of tagging implementation projects were really long and boring, and it was really frustrating that people would spin off a project and like 3 months later they still weren't actually getting the outcome.
It would often sit in the too hard box. You ask your team in terms of, we need to fix that data capture.
Got to find agents who knows what to do it. It's got to spec out the project, got to manage the project.
It'll take months.
And really want to compress that months into hours, in fact, frankly, into minutes. And I often say, look, it'll take 10 minutes to sell a little later. And I get that sort of slightly questioning look when I pitch you the first time. And that's the main thing they come back to us and say, do you know what? It really did take 10 minutes.
We often don't even, I know this sounds bad, we don't even, of course, we tell our clients we're installing it. But ultimately, it's never really a negative conversation. My question, one thing which I always come back to is, the ROI of any deliverable that you're working on has to be positive. So therefore, you need to be delivering something that's positive ROI. But actually, so in the case of some larger clients, if the implementation of a solution is less than 1% of your media spend a month, wouldn't you want that for 100% visibility?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one way to put it. And the other way I always put it is like, look, if we're going to absolutely, obviously we see cases where we're improving ROAS by kind of 30 to 50%, but I mean, it's going to be 10 to 20% of the very baseline. So again, would you happily spend 1% to get 10%? Yeah, I think you would.
I'd happily spend 1% less on my media. And get a hell of a lot more visibility of what's working in order to save 10%. So, but then not necessarily to stop spending, but more to then reutilize that capital to drive further growth.
I think honestly, if people really believe that proposition, I believe Littledata would have grown much faster the last few years. I think the challenge we have is that unfortunately there are lots of people who are selling snake oil out there.
Absolutely.
And this whole we can get you more for your marketing spend. It's wonderfully seductive, but lots of people being burned, I think one of the things we have to prove is that through ease of install, but also just through robust data quality, it actually works.
Yes.
Because I honestly just think that's the biggest thing we fight against is the basic, the cynicism that I've heard this pitch before.
Well, the client's often thrown a dart at a dartboard with their eyes closed.
Yeah.
Because they've been told, oh, don't worry about it, we've got it covered.
Yeah.
And they haven't gone to the route of they'll just take over your paid ad accounts, or they'll look at work and not actually get under the hood of, is this, can I believe what my team are reading? To be able to interpret and optimize to give the client benefit.
I guess thinking about it, this is where your sort of insourcing model is a bit different and you have a different incentive, right? Because if you are an outsourced media agency, you just want to show the clients the best result possible and obviously measure that yourself and show the best possible reading of that.
Absolutely.
But if you actually, as you say, running the show, you're on the, you're gamekeeper, not poacher, and you need to be able to actually know for certain this is true.
And it's also about putting the cash in the right place and saving the client time on it's saving them, accelerating them getting to where they need to be.
Yeah.
Which sounds like such a holy grail effect, but that doesn't necessarily mean we're delivering more. What it often means is we're going to the client and saying, stop looking at these 40 things. Here are the vital few. Here are the 6 things that you need to be focusing on in the next 12 months, 18 months to give you the foundation for that future growth.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about Northern Gym Equipment, which is the other brand that you've been involved with. And again, another good example of a quite high consideration purchase, I imagine.
Yeah. Some of it, absolutely. But, it's that classic, it sounds terrible, bloke purchase of, I need some dumbbells. Yeah. Which, if anyone looks at me, I clearly haven't been looking for a while.
I bet impulse.
But ultimately, the purchase cycle is actually quite short for a huge range of products, but you're absolutely right. As Northern Gym becomes more of a brand, and their pricing architecture, which we've worked really heavily with them on over the last kind of 12 months, fits that good, better, best hierarchy, you're going to have short decision cycles and long decision cycles. And therefore, making sure the data can allow us to target individuals based upon that need state is really important. So good returning customer rate. So therefore, the function within Littledata of being able to split out that new versus returning customer element has actually changed the way that we look at some of our remarketing strategies. Yeah. So therefore, how are we breaking down true customer repurchase versus prospect activation on remarketing, for example? Yeah. So therefore, we're actually putting budget into the right place at different times. So coming up to Black Friday, as we were, it's about putting capital into existing customer remarketing of those that are possibly less engaged over the last kind of 12 months. We're trying to activate them to buy when they wouldn't necessarily have bought at a higher margin. Yeah, no, super interesting. So in terms of the kind of conversion events we're supplying, as you rightly say, out of the box, kind of spreading out new versus returning, is sometimes you want to focus on returning, sometimes you actually want to apply for new, and there'll be different acquisition costs for both, because obviously getting people to purchase the first time is a much harder hurdle, but higher hurdle. And for smaller brands where they're going, well, I can't afford to run paid ad. We've literally had a prospect we talked to a couple of months ago where they were saying, we literally pause all our ads during Black Friday because we can't afford to compete. And so we gave them a strategy of, well, actually, before Black Friday, use low cost, high visibility ads to your target consumers and use engagement and video view throughs to determine whether it's the right segment that could be a good match for your brand. Put those into a remarketing audience during Black Friday or in the run up to Black Friday and try and keep that CPC as low as you can, because they're already engaged. They should have a good click-through rate. So therefore, in Google's eyes, you should start to get the benefit of good, solid CPCs. So therefore, you're almost skimming off the market. Yeah, you're thinking ahead of how do I build this audience pre-Black Friday to activate it at that point in time, rather than just trying to spend, it's quite a French phrase, shitloads of cash during Black Friday to try and get market share. Yeah.
I mean, so you mentioned something really interesting there about the sort of different, within, you say, the gym equipment they're selling to the quite different customer segments. You say that the sort of more impulse purchase for the dumbbells and the more high consideration purchase for maybe the running machine or something like that. And it actually really feeds into a lot of the stuff we're trying to do next quarter around helping brands actually define, even going beyond the new versus returning, having brands define like triggers for maybe specific product categories. Because I just see this as where the game is going, particularly with Meta and Google Ads, where the ad platforms actually don't have an incentive to allow you to do micro targeting there, because it gets, first of all, generally people screw it up, but secondly, basically they end up spending less money, smaller audience. But if you can feed in that audience and sync it automatically just based on the actual events they're doing on the site, again, it's TBD. We're working with partners such yourselves to test this out, but I really believe that that's the how you get to that next level of efficiency. Because as I said, you'd probably bid quite differly for people who were going to buy the impulse, the dumbbells versus and frankly, your margin on those products is very different. So your willingness to spend is different that way.
You're starting to get into the world of next best action theory. And margin based bidding. So therefore, you're able to combine the two elements of, there is in attribution modeling. If we go back to that, there's a time decay model. So basically showing how accelerative you can make your purchase. So if I can close more customers in a shorter period of time, these are the media that do that for me. So therefore, how do for that next best action element effectively accelerate that decision making process? So therefore, what product do I put in front of them? But actually, for Google and Meta, I completely agree. That whole kind of one bucket, one campaign approach is, for me, having, been a marketing fundamentalist, slight, not anarchist per se, but ultimately it's a case of, you define your audience first. You define your audience, you define your messaging, and you define the products that fit that audience. And you then hyper target that audience because it should be the most effective. If you go back to catalog and direct mail, which I was doing, late 90s, early noughties, and still do a little bit off if I'm lucky, then, you have to be hyper targeted with that because you're paying £1.50 for a catalog to land on someone's doorstep.
You've attended the wrong person in what a waste.
So you've got to do that up front. And I think that for some of the clients we're working with at the moment, we're doing some Experian modeling with some of that customer data set. And we're then doing postcodal density mapping for their target Experian mosaic segments. So we can effectively remove the noise and then get Meta and Google to say, well, actually, if these are the postcodes where we have a high density of those target consumers, but we have a low penetration, how do we then target that? But then the piece of what are the right categories to put in front of them? Absolutely.
I've become a bit more cynical about this last month because I used to think that the reason that Meta particularly was pulling back from sort of in pushing Advantage Plus and just saying, like, you kind of widen the audience and we'll sort of figure out within that what's the right targeting. I sort of thought that's for, genuine performance reasons, that basically the algorithm does better than humans at sort of trying to pick the audience. I do still believe that. I just also believe, talking to a few people in my trip in California last month, that there's also a basic spend point of view, that obviously the wider the audience, the more chance Meta has to serve ads to a wider group of people, and therefore you'll still get a return because they're still incentivized to give you enough returns so you keep spending, but ultimately they just have more opportunity to serve ads. Or to put it another way, if everyone micro-define the audience, they'd all be trying to bid for the same people, and they wouldn't serve ads to 99% of their audience.
And if you've got at a fundamental level, if you've got a restaurant in Manchester, why are you going to bother advertising in London? So if you can, for a retailer perspective, remove some of that noise to start with, then Meta and Google should effectively spend less on trying to work out what's there and actually give you a much more defined audience within the target you believe is the right fit. But it has to be derived by data rather than gut feel. And
you have to be able to share a matter what is that.
Exactly.
What are the attributes of those people that make them interesting? Okay, awesome. So moving on. Let's talk a bit about how do you think that having more accurate tracking of the customers, more accurate data into the marketing channels actually changed the strategy for some of those brands of what you were able to do, like in terms of either highlighted opportunities that were missed before or basically enabled different types of marketing?
So I think the one thing we often see with brands where their data is not robust or not trusted, and most brands, if I'm completely honest, most board members and finance directors in particular do not trust the data coming out of digital marketeers generally.
Yes.
Because historically we might have possibly fudged it slightly. But I think the elements it's giving us are, one, it means that brands are stopping seeing this constant shrinking of their available market.
Yeah.
Because they are constantly focusing on the bottom of funnel.
Yeah.
It allows them to think more around, actually, how do I start to find pockets of customer that ultimately I can engage with at the top of the funnel to start putting my brand in front of competitors. And I don't mean by saying, well, actually, I'm a brand that operates in the cereal market. I'm going to hit Kellogg's website and anyone that visits Kellogg's website. Yeah. I'm thinking more about what is, Surreal is a perfect example of a business that has done an incredible job of, one, finding a clear tone of voice that cuts through.
Yeah.
Two, defining their target market and the locations in the UK where it would resonate. And three, being completely consistent about that message across their channels. So therefore, they're creating density of conversation that is allowing them to put their brand above others to be actually considered. And that top of funnel then gives them the ability to work their way down and go, well, actually, are we getting sell through on this channel, or are we actually increasing our penetration in this particular area? And that's always been the holy grail for high street brands. We at B&Q, we were constantly using a dirty term of econometrics to try and understand, well, actually, how are Wix and, et cetera, Homebase at the time performing, and how are we getting share of voice and resonance in the market?
It's so important tying in this sort of the brand marketing element to the performance marketing element, right? Because it's often missed. I mean, going back to your point about, how marketers got a bit of a dirty reputation for fudging numbers. I think it's actually not actually fudging numbers, but the fact that they're presenting it as sort of, clear and obvious truth, where in actual fact it's all, subjective.
It's that classic line of lies, damn lies, and statistics.
Yes.
Whether that's an accurate phrase or not, who knows? I'm not renowned for accuracy. No, I'm joking. So it's always been the justification of spend. So if you are a marketing manager or a head of e-commerce or whatever, you are constantly having to justify, why am I spending such a large amount on advertising? And what is that doing to the bottom line? And that's often a conversation a marketeer is not great at having, because they constantly go back to, actually, it's this market share. It's all about, it's the halo effect. It's X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And then it swung the other way to, actually, if we spend £1, this return on ad spend metric in Google is saying we're getting £2.40 back or £4.40. So, Mr. Finance Director, we need more of that.
Yeah.
And then they start to see their market decline and the customers churn. And they're not bringing enough new customers to
the incremental gain seems to.
So they, the best marketeers I'm seeing now are those coming up through the ranks that are both madmen and mathsmen, which is it's a term that a friend of mine, Marcus Hemsley, has often used, who's the MD of Fountain Partnership, a really good paid media agency. He's constantly talking about the math men and the mad men. It's that beautiful combination of creative and analytics.
Yeah. I mean, you need the creative in there for sure.
You do. You've got to be able to emotionally connect with someone, and for them to resonate and go, oh, I get it. I love that brand. That's the thing you want. I love that brand. I really want that product. I want to buy a Bremont watch for £5,500, but I can't afford it yet. But I am going to follow everything they do for the next 10 years until I can afford one.
Yeah. And they're your top of funnel. They're your lurkers. They're going to at some point get their big bonus and buy. So, look, I get pushback all the time from marketing directors who say, look, I'm drowning in data. I've got, Shopify's telling me one thing. I've got, that's telling me another thing. How do you position Littledata to those sort of, I mean, obviously typically you're putting the fractional marketing director yourself, but maybe it's the finance director who needs to justify the cost.
There's always the justification of the cost. We wouldn't put something in that spends money and doesn't give a return, because that in essence is it's a waste of our time. The first thing for me is right, you need a single point of truth. You need to hit that spot.
Yeah.
So the single point of truth. And therefore, in order to do that, you need the data to be absolutely robust in its nature into one place that then can be passed out to multiple places so that traceability back.
Yes.
It is correct. So therefore, you can then need to reverse engineer your sources. So where are you currently getting your sources from, and what can be replaced by both server-side tracking and also tracking that ultimately is augmenting that data with enriched data sources?
Yeah.
Third piece is KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Do not try and I really probably need to write this on a mirror at home because I'm terrible for over-augmenting stuff. But keep it simple, stupid. It's got to be the fundamentals first. Start with the basics. Don't try and over-engineer it. The fourth one is then map it to your activation channels. So which are the ones that currently challenge you on delivering the highest volume of cost or the highest volume of perceived new customers? And make sure you're passing the data into those channels so you can make the biggest impact quickest. And the last one is then ensure that you have mechanisms that you can tell that story. So whether that's dashboards, whether that's Excel reporting, whether you still want to do that, but ultimately make sure that they are, whether you're looking at the preface of a book or the stuff on the back cover, to tell you whether the contents of that book is actually worth reading further. That's what you need to be delivering to your exec. Something that they get, oh, this is an interesting story. Tell me more. Why did this work? Why is this succeeding? Why is this giving us new data that I can understand and I believe?
Yeah. No, I think traceability is a key point out of what you just said there. Like this, because I think most of the brands who are trading on Shopify, ultimately they do see the Shopify source of truth. Like they know that that's the money that actually hit their bank account. Those were definitely sales that got shipped. They know that much. And so I guess our whole approach to traceability has been, through the server side tracking, tracing all of those events back to what actually happened on Shopify servers. And that's, makes it much less immune to bots and sort of, outright sort of fraud. It makes it much less subject to layout changes, theme changes that might break. This again, going back to the days of doing sort of gig or tag management setup, we'd constantly have these cycles of despair where, they'd have made a ship a new product details page and the tracking broke. And then they'd be like, oh, how did that page, oh, damn, we forgot to fix the tracking.
And I'm sure there are some developers that actually quite like doing tracking, but 90% of developers I've talked to, it's like, oh, I've forgotten the track. Oh, to put the GTN tag in the front of the
absolutely an afterthought.
Yeah,
absolutely an afterthought. Well, thanks for coming on the podcast. It's been very interesting.
Thank you.
And, see you again.
Cheers.